Alright, econ students. So this is 1.5 supply. So last class we did demand. Your homework is to go through supply, right? So you should take notes on this. You will never have work where you're just going to have to have only a demand curve or only a supply curve. It'll always be mixed, but I wanted to prioritize doing that more in class rather than focusing on doing supply in class and then what we're doing next class uh, online. So that's why this part is online. So I'm going to keep it relatively quick and kind of simple and bare bones. I tried to shorten this slideshow as much as possible so you wouldn't have as much homework. So let's go ahead and get into it. So just a tip, you don't have to write this down, but just know this in your brain, okay? But the law of supply is going to revolve pretty much only around producers and production. Remember, we've got consumers and producers. Consumers are those who purchase or consume products. Producers are those who produce them. So consumer behavior is not going to impact supply. So if there's more demand or people are buying more of a certain product or less of a certain product, does not affect supply because consumer actions cannot impact supply, right? The impact of supply is solely based on producers, okay? So law of supply is producers, law of demand is consumers. So just make sure that is locked in your brain. So if we're talking about supply is the different quantities of a good that sellers are willing and able to sell or produce at different prices, right? So as we talked about last time, right, there's a law of supply, just like with the law of demand. Although the law of supply is slightly different, right? Rather than having an inverse relationship, the law of supply, we have a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. And remember, there is that big difference between overall supply and quantity supplied, just like there was with overall demand and quantity demanded. So keep that in mind. That never changes regardless of whether we're talking about supply or demand, or later on in the semester when we actually use this to much more detail, aggregate supply or aggregate demand. So there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So as the price increases, as the price goes up, the quantity producers are producing also increases. So just imagine, just like with demand where I was pointing a lot, right? Just imagine me pointing, right? As price falls, as price goes down, the quantity producers are going to produce goes down. So the quantity produced decreases. Okay, the reason is because firms or businesses, remember we call businesses firms in this class as well. So firms have an incentive to produce more when the price is higher, right? So think about it. If you were trying to make profit, okay, and you're selling 5 units or 5 burritos, and the price of those burritos is $10, right? And you're making profit on each one of those, right? If the price was $15, you'd be willing and able to produce more burritos because you can make more profit. Whereas if the price is lower at $5, you're willing and able to produce less burritos because you're going to make less profit. Okay, should make sense logically, right? Like I talked about last class, this all logically makes sense because you live in a capitalist society. So this just visualizes it, right? As price increases, right? Here's the arrows, quantity supplied increases. As price decreases, quantity supplied decreases. And as a reminder, right, the law of supply is a direct relationship between the two, okay? So remember, do not forget that the goal of any producer, any firm is to make as much money as possible. They are for profit, okay? So if consumers are willing to pay a higher price, we're going to supply more of that product, right? So if the price is higher, we're going to produce more. So if we just remember, if you own a lawnmower and you're willing to mow lawns, right? And at certain prices, you're willing to pay or to mow a certain number of lawns, right? So if that's all of the prices we have, uh, this is what a supply schedule would look like, just like a demand schedule. And as you could probably guess, the higher number is going to be the higher number supplied, the higher quantity supplied is going to be at 1,000 lawns mowed, and the lowest number is going to be at $1, right? Because we are willing to mow more lawns if we're going to make $1,000 per lawn than if we only made $1. Okay, so if we graph it, okay, and you don't have to label or put in the numbers, but you should draw roughly what the supply curve looks like, right? So if we look here, right, at $1, we're supplying 10, 2, 20, 3, 30, 4, 40, 5, 50, right? So it's an upward sloping curve. Okay. The way you can remember that is in supply, right? You've got the word up, right? Upward sloping. Okay. If you remember the trick from demand, right? Demand sounds like sand, and sand is on the ground, so it's gonna curve down. Okay. So what happens though if there's new and more productive milking machines, right? It makes it easier for us to produce milk, easier and cheaper. Okay. As you probably guess, what's going to happen is we're going to see an increase in the quantity supplied at each and every price, right? At $1, we're now able to produce or supply 30 gallons of milk instead of 10, 40 at 2, 50 at 3, 60 at 4, 70 at 5. So an increase in the quantity supplied at each and every price, which results in a shift to the right. Okay. At each and every price. So you can see the points move, right? You can see this point here, right under supply, it moves to the right. This point moves to the right. This point moves to the right, moves to the right, moves to the right. Our curve in its entirety shifts to the right. So in this case, we have an increase in supply, right? Remember, an increase in supply or a decrease in supply result is because of a shift, whereas an increase in the quantity supplied is just moving along the curve, okay? So this show, like I said, shows an increase in supply. So the price doesn't change, but there's more milk produced at each and every price. Okay, now what if the price for dairy cows increases drastically, right? We look at our original curve. We're going to be able to produce less milk at each and every price because it costs us more to produce that milk. Okay, so 0, 1, 10, 20, 30. Right? So as you can see, it shifts to the left. At each and every price, we are producing less milk. Okay, at each and every price. So remember, this represents a decrease in supply, right? Because we're shifting, our curve is shifting, and we're producing less milk at each and every price, but the price is not changing. Okay. Now, just like with demand, there are 5 shifters or determinants of supply. Okay. I'm going to put them up here, and we're going to talk about each one on a different slide, so don't write them down yet. But remember, a change in price doesn't shift the curve. It only causes movement along the curve, right? But a shift in supply moves the whole curve. Okay, so we're going to do input prices, number of sellers, technology, taxes and subsidies, and expectations of future profit. Okay, so we're going to start with technology, and we'll see what we spell out at the end. Right. So with technology, as you could probably assume, if there's better technology, we're going to be able to produce more at each and every price because it's cheaper, more efficient, faster, all of the above, and we're going to shift the curve to the right at each and every price. Right. So at each and every price, we're producing a higher quantity supplied, and so the whole curve shifts to the right. If we have worse technology or technology is destroyed, we shift it to the left, right? So if I can make 10 pizzas with that brick oven on the left, right? If I had the Pizzatron 3000 on the right-hand side, I would be able to produce more pizzas. My supply would increase, or my quantity supplied would increase at each and every price, okay? So technology is our first shifter. It starts with a T. Input prices is going to be our next one. And really, it's more input prices, productivity, and availability. So when we're talking about input prices, think of factors of production: capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. Okay, so if there's a change in quantity, quality, availability, or how much it costs for these factors of production, it's going to increase supply or decrease supply, right? So as you can probably assume, when the price of the inputs goes up, okay, the supply curve is going to shift to the left. It's going to decrease in supply because if it costs more, we can't produce as much at each price, right? So this could be wages, it could be prices of raw materials, it could be that we have less of the raw materials available, right? Which that kind of links to the law of demand, because if there's less of the raw materials available, the price of those goods will go up, right? Scarcity. So input prices can also be productivity and availability as well. Okay, so we've got a T and an I. So just to illustrate this, so if we're looking at the supply of lattes, right, if the price of milk falls, At each and every price, the quantity of lattes supplied will increase, right? And our curve shifts to the right. Now, the next one is going to be number of producers or number of suppliers. So basically, if there's more producers in the market, we're going to shift the supply curve to the right. We're going to increase it. If there's less producers in the market, it's going to shift to the left or decrease. Because remember, we're not considering in these just the products produced by one producer or the products demanded by one consumer. We're thinking about the whole market, just like we talked about last class. So if we're opening up 10 new Taco Bells in Santa Rosa, the supply of Taco Bell would increase because we have more suppliers. So they're going to produce more stuff. Okay. This one's pretty simple. If you have a decrease, it's going to decrease supply. If you have an increase in number of producers, it's going to increase the supply. Right. So this one, not all that different from number of buyers in demand. Okay. So that's TIN. Now, the second T is going to be taxes and subsidies. Okay. So this is going to be taxes that are paid by firms are going to hurt companies, right? Because taxes take money from a company, right? So that's going to shift our supply curve to the left. Whereas a subsidy, which is when the government is going to pay a business or pay people, suppliers in a market. So it could be a farm subsidy, a milk subsidy. Basically, the government is going to give companies money to produce a certain thing. Okay, so a subsidy is going to make it cheaper to produce, and then it's going to cause the supply curve to shift to the right or increase, right? So taxes go to the left, subsidies go to the right. Okay, taxes to the left, subsidies to the right. So our last one is going to be expectations. Okay, so expectations, let me just put this all up here so you can see. So basically, the way to think about it is that in general, we are going to think about how suppliers look at the expectations of their of the price of their goods in the future, right? Future expectations. So, if a producer thinks that the price of the good that they are producing is going to increase a month from now, they're going to decrease supply now and then increase supply in the future. So remember, with these, we're only considering what is happening now. We don't care about what's happening in the future as far as shifts. The shifts only represent what happens right now rather than what happens in the future. So keep that in mind. So when you've got expectations, right, the whole idea is that if the expected good is going to be more expensive in the future, we're going to decrease supply now so we can save our resources and then produce more later on. So we're trying to save our resources and supply less right now. Then the flip side of that is that if we expect that the price of that good is going to decrease in the future, we're going to produce as much as we can now to try to sell it at the higher price. And then, so we're going to see supply increase now and shift to the right. So in general, we're going to adjust supply based on what we think will happen in the future. But keep in mind that this is only if a good is not perishable, right? So if I'm producing milk, I can't hold off on selling my milk for a month, right? I have to sell it now. But if I'm producing, let's say, robots, I could decrease the supply that I'm letting out into the market now, hold on to them, and then sell them later. Because remember, when we're talking about supply, we're not necessarily just talking about like when it's produced, we're talking about when it's being supplied, when it's being sold. Okay, so keep that in mind. That sometimes that hangs students up with expectations. But the general rule with expectations is that if we think the price is going to go up in the future, we're going to decrease supply now. If we think the price is going to go down in the future, we're going to increase supply now. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. TINTE. Okay. Tint. E. Tinty. Right. Doesn't work as well as bright, but that's okay. So if we do this question, which of the following will cause the quantity supplied of milk to decrease? A, B, C, D, or E. So take a second, pause the video. Okay, so if you're watching now, you should have figured out what you think your answer is. So the correct answer is going to be C, a decrease in the price of milk. Right? So what of the following will cause this quantity supplied of milk to decrease? Remember, when we're changing quantity supply, that means movement on the curve. So that's going to be a change in the price. And if we decrease the quantity supplied, we're also seeing a decrease in the price. Okay, because remember, we have a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Okay. Now, next one. The supply curve for automobiles will shift to the left in response to A, B, C, D, or E. So pause the video, figure out what you think your answer is. Okay, again, if you're now watching the video again, you figured out your answer, you put it down in your notes. The answer is going to be B. So if the supply curve is shifting, remember, that's not going to be a change in price. That's going to be some kind of shifter, one of our TINTE, our tint E shifts. Okay. So if we're shifting to the left, that's going to be an increase in wages, because if we see an increase, if for A is not the answer, because if we're increasing the efficiency, it means we can produce more. So that's going to shift to the right. C, a decrease in the number of consumers. Remember, consumer actions, right, like number of buyers or number of consumers, does not impact supply. So it can't be C. D, a decrease in the interest rates for automobile loans, right? That's a consumer thing, right? That's going to be more about like kind of along the lines of like consumer income, not related. And E, a decrease in consumer income, not related, right? We only care when we're shifting the supply curve, we only care about things that directly impact suppliers. And an increase in the wages in the automobile industry will make it more expensive. So it's going to raise input prices. That's our shifter. And so it's going to shift our supply curve to the left. It's going to decrease supply because it becomes more expensive to produce. Okay, now, what I would like you to do, draw this box in your notes, or at least like write down numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for each of these, you're gonna something's gonna happen. The shifter is gonna happen, and you're gonna say whether it causes an increase or decrease to supply, which corresponds with a left or right shift. I'll give you a hint. There is one trick one in there where it's gonna be movement on the curve. Okay, so keep that in mind. So here are your 6. So go ahead and pause the video, put those in your notes, and then I will come back and explain them. Okay. Okay, so if you're watching now, let me just show you this, right? So this is the answers. So you can pause it here and make sure you have the right answers. Now let me go back and explain why. So if there is a strange virus that kills 20% of all cows, and our product is hamburgers, right? That is going to cause that the determinant, the shifter here, is going to be input prices, or really more input availability, right? Because we have less cows. So if we have less cows, it's going to make it more expensive to produce or harder to produce. So we're going to we're going to decrease supply and shift it to the left. Okay. Number 2, price of hamburgers increases by 30%. Remember, a change in price of our product is going to result in movement along the curve, not a shift. So this results in movement along the curve, and we're going to see movement along the curve to be a higher quantity supplied, right? So an increase in the quantity supplied. So it's going to move to the right, but it's not going to shift the curve to the right. It's just going to move higher along the curve. Number 3, government taxes burger producers. So this would be the shifter would be taxes and subsidies. This would result in a decrease because taxes result in making this good more expensive to produce, which means we're going to produce less of it. So it's going to shift the curve to the left and decrease supply. Number 4, new bun baking technology cuts production time in half. This is going to be technology as our shifter. Remember, better technology means an increase in supply and a shift to the right. Okay. Number 5, the government subsidizes beef producers. So remember, subsidies, the government's giving producers money. So this is going to make it cheaper to produce these goods because we're getting money when we do it. So we're going to increase supply, and we're going to shift it to the right. Remember, increases always shift to the right, decreases always shift to the left. Okay. And then number 6, minimum wage increases to $20. So this one is going to be input prices as our shifter, because we have to pay people to make our hamburgers. So we're going to produce less. We're going to decrease supply, and it's going to shift to the left because it costs us more to produce. So I'll put the answers back up here. This is the last slide. Go ahead and make sure your answers are correct there. Answer the last question in the Edpuzzle with any questions so I can address them in next class. As a reminder, your Unit 1 test is going to be next week on Wednesday. Okay, remember it's going to be a shorter test than normal. And next class, so on Thursday or Friday, Wednesday or Thursday this week, whenever you're watching this, but next class is going to be, we're going to be putting supply and demand together and learning about equilibrium, okay, which is the part of this that you're going to use the most. All right, so have a good day. Let me know if you have questions.